The rider emerged from the shadows, his silhouette a stark, motionless figure against the golden light that filtered through the trees. Clément Gosselin pressed himself lower into the underbrush. Breath caught as the copper horse's hooves crushed the forest floor into silence. It wasn't the horse that chilled his blood. It was the man who rode it. Autumn had gripped 1755, and whispers of British encroachment were spreading like a poison through Acadian settlements. Grand Pré, nestled in Acadia's heartland, modern-day Nova Scotia, was no stranger to British soldiers, but the uneasy coexistence had soured. The war had turned the looming threat into something far more dangerous. The woods had warned him moments before. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, only silence that settled like a heavy fog. Now Clément understood why. He shifted closer to the ground, the musket strap biting into his shoulder. His father's words echoed in his mind.
"The woods are hunter's sanctuary, but they can just as easily be your grave."
The rider sat tall, his long black coat draping over the horse like spilled ink. A wide-brimmed hat cast his face in shadow, but the glint of pale skin stretched over angular cheekbones sent a chill through Clément. The man radiated an authority that demanded submission without a word. The horse slowed. Hoofbeats turned deliberate, as though the rider was searching. And he wasn't alone. The sharp crack of a twig broke the stillness, drawing Clément's gaze to the flesh of red in the underbrush. A British soldier stumbled into the clearing, his polished gorget catching the faint light. His face was pale, slick with sweat, and his eyes darted wildly, as though expecting shadows to close in from every direction. In his trembling hands he clutched a worn leather satchel, the straps creaking under the force of his grip. Each hesitant step toward the rider was unsteady, his boots catching on roots and leaves. He halted a few paces from the copper horse, his shoulders hunched as if shielding himself from a blow.
I thought they said you—"
The words faltered, swallowed by the weight of his terror, his eyes fixed on the rider, who remained impossibly still, a dark silhouette against the shifting light.
"They told us you wouldn't! Not again!"
The soldier's voice cracked, his words tumbled in fragments.
I didn't think I'd see you."
The rider moved on to extend a gloved hand toward the satchel. The motion was slow, deliberate, as if time itself bent to his will. The soldier flinched, clutching the satchel closer to his chest for a fleeting moment. Then, with a shuddering breath, he held it out, his hands trembling so violently the bag nearly slipped from his grasp.
I didn't open it,"
he muttered, his voice hoarse and broken.
"They said I never—"
He trailed off, swallowing hard as his gaze flicked to the rider's shadowed face.
I swear I didn't look."
The rider took the satchel without a word, the faint snap of its clasp breaking the silence like a crack of thunder. The soldier let his hands fall limply to his sides, his shoulders sagging as though he'd been relieved of an unbearable weight. For a moment, the rider remained still, his pale visage unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. The copper horse shifted slightly, its hooves scraping softly against the dirt, and Clément swore he felt the earth shiver beneath him.
I didn't see you,"
the soldier stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The faintest flicker of amusement played across his lips, gone so quickly, Clément wondered if he'd imagined it. The rider tilted his head, his voice smooth as the breeze that stilled the forest.
"It's never finished."
The rider turned the copper horse with a fluid motion, his cloak trailing like a shadow behind him. Without a glance back, he vanished into the trees, the eerie silence of his departure pressing down on the clearing. The soldier stayed rooted to the spot, his hands still shaking at his sides.
"God help us,"
he murmured, his voice trembling with a weight of unspoken fears. From his hiding place, Clément felt his heart pounding in his chest. He heard a single word from the rider, yet the terror etched into the soldier's face told him more than words ever could. Whatever had passed between them, It carried a significance Clément couldn't yet comprehend, but one he knew would not bode well. Clément's mind raced. What kind of man inspires fear in a British officer who wields the king's power? Clément froze, every muscle tense as the forest seemed to hold its breath. Only when the soldier vanished into the trees did the rider nudge his horse forward, the satchel tucked neatly under his arm. Still hidden, Clément's muscles burned from holding still, but his mind refused to release the scene. The man wasn't a ghost, yet something about him defied explanation. The soldier's haunted expression lingered in Clément's thoughts, not fear of battle or death, but of something far worse, a fear that lingered. "Le bon Désiré." His mother's voice returned to him. The woods have ears. Golden leaves drifted around him as the breeze stirred once more, whispering through the branches like a warning. Clément's gaze stayed fixed on the trail where the rider had vanished. Men like that didn't simply pass through unnoticed. They left shadows in their wake. And yet, the world did not stop for ghosts. The trees swayed, the distant call of a bird broke the silence, and the scent of wood smoke curled through the air, tugging him back to the present. He turned toward home, yet Clément hesitated at the edge of the yard. The familiar cluck of chickens and the warmth of curling smoke should have soothed him, but the shadows of the forest seemed to cling to his back. He glanced over his shoulder, once, twice, before finally stepping toward the home that had always been his anchor. Inside, the rasp of a whetstone against steel filled the air. Gabriel's broad-shouldered silhouette worked in the warm glow of the hanging lantern. His father's presence was like the roots of an oak, steady, immovable. Clément hovered in the doorway, his boots scuffing against the packed dirt floor. Gabriel glanced up, dark eyes sharp as they met his son's.
"What is it?"
Gabriel asked, setting the whetstone aside. Clément hesitated, the weight of what he'd seen pressing on his chest. "There was someone on the southern trail," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Gabriel said nothing, but his stillness invited Clément to continue. "A man met a British soldier," Clément said, his words spilling out. "The soldier gave him a bag. They didn't see me." Gabriel's jaw tightened.
"What kind of man?"
"He wasn't normal," Clément replied, struggling to explain. "Pale, like he hadn't seen the sun in years. His horse, it looked like copper. He seemed in charge, but not like any officer I've ever seen." Gabriel secured the axe and tested its edge with his thumb, his movement slow, deliberate.
"You're certain they didn't see you?"
"Yes, Papa." Gabriel's gaze flicked to the musket hanging on the wall.
"Keep this between us,"
he said firmly.
"Not a word to your mother or brothers."
"But—" Clément began.
"Not yet."
Gabriel interrupted, his voice brooking no argument.
"If this man comes near our land, I'll deal with it. Until then, we stay quiet."
Clément nodded, though the unease in his chest refused to fade. The barn door creaked, and Marie stepped inside, her flour-dusted hands brushing against her apron. Her keen eyes swept over them. "What's not good for us?" she asked lightly, though her tone carried an edge. Gabriel's steady voice cut through.
"Clément saw something, a meeting on the southern trail."
Marie's face tightened. "What kind of meeting?" Clément's voice dropped. "It wasn't normal." Gabriel placed a reassuring hand on Marie's shoulder.
"We watch, we listen, and we stay out of sight."
Marie pressed her lips into a thin line, but her nod carried resolve. "Be careful, Clément," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I will," he promised. As Clément stepped into the cool night, Gabriel's steady presence lingered in his thoughts. Yet the question burned in his mind. Who was that man, and what shadow had he brought to their doorstep? The Frico's warmth. The aroma of Frico filled the Gosselin cabin, the the stew bubbling softly over the hearth, the rich scent of chicken, potatoes, and dumplings wrapped around the family like a fragile shield against the tension in the air. Outside, the wind rustled the shutters, carrying a faint cry of an owl, a reminder of the dark expanse beyond their walls. At the table, Clément leaned close to Gabriel, their heads nearly touching as they pored over a smudged parchment. The firelight threw flickering shadows across their faces, illuminating the worry etched into their expressions.
"It came through our merchant friend in Halifax,"
Clément murmured, his voice barely audible.
"Meant for British officers. He thought we'd want to know."
Gabriel's eyes scanned the text, his brow furrowing with each line.
Fortifications in Halifax, troops to Beausejour, demands for the oath.
His voice faded as he rubbed his temple, the weight of the words pressing down on him. Clément tapped a line with his finger, his lips tightening.
"And here, impending action to remove or deport the Acadian population. They think we're spies for the French, Papa."
Gabriel stilled. His dark eyes slid to Clément, and though he said nothing, his meaning was unmistakable. "We are." Clément allowed himself a faint, humorless smile.
"At least they're not wrong."
Gabriel let out a dry chuckle, a sound more bitter than amused.
"Let's hope they stay too busy chasing rumors to prove them true."
Before Clément could respond, Xavier's voice broke the quiet. "What's so secret it needs whispering?" Gabriel straightened, his calm mask sliding back into place.
"Farm matters,"
he said, his tone dismissive. Xavier, leaning casually against the hearth, arched an eyebrow but let the matter drop as the scent of fricot drew his attention. Jean moved with practiced efficiency, setting bowls on the table, while Louis followed with a fresh loaf of bread tucked under his arm.
"Fricot again?"
Louis teased, his grin breaking through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. Jean smirked as he took his seat.
"You'd be the first to complain if it weren't your favorite."
"Complain?"
Louis laughed, tearing a piece of bread.
"I'd eat it every day if Maman let me."
Marie, setting the steaming pot in the center of the table, arched an eyebrow.
"You do eat it every day."
"And that's why we're still here, Maman,"
Louis quipped with a wink.
"Good fricot keeps a family strong."
Laughter rippled through the room, a welcome balm to unspoken fears that clung to them. Clément tucked the parchment into his coat, catching Gabriel's gaze. His father's faint nod was clear. Not now. The unexpected visitor. The family settled into their meal, the quiet punctuated by the clink of spoons and the soft murmur of the fire. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters like an impatient visitor. Gabriel's gaze flicked to the musket, propped near the door, its polished stock gleaming faintly in the firelight. The silence shattered. Bang, bang, bang! The heavy pounding on the cabin door froze everyone in place. Spoons hovered mid-air, breaths caught in throats. Slowly, all eyes shifted to Gabriel, their unspoken question clear. Who would come to our door at this hour? Gabriel remained seated for a heartbeat longer, his face unreadable. Then, with deliberate calm, he set his spoon down and turned his gaze to the musket. He rose, his movements deliberate, his large frame casting a shadow across the room. As he approached the door, the firelight seemed to dim, the tension in the air thickening. His hand gripped the latch, steady despite the storm brewing inside. When the door creaked open, the cold night air swept in, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and pine. A figure stood on the threshold, draped in a long black coat. His wide-brimmed hat shielded his face from the lantern's glow, but the rainwater pooling at his feet reflected the pale, angular features that Clément recognized instantly.
"Good evening,"
the man said, his voice smooth, calculated, and unshakably calm.
"The road has been long. Might I find warmth by your fire?"
Clément's chest tightened. It's him. His fingers twitched toward the musket, but Gabriel's steady presence held him in place. Gabriel studied the man, his sharp gaze tracking every detail. The one